Welcome to Good Burger Reviews. My name is John, and I'm here to review a brand new 2026 movie, and that movie is Evil Dead Burn!
My grandfather believed the devil would return if anyone read from the Book of the Dead.
Calm down.
This movie was released to theaters in July of 2026. It is directed by Sebastian Vanatek. It stars Sohelia Yacob, Hunter Doohan, and Lucille Buchanan. Basic premise. After a loss of her husband, a woman seeks solace with her in-laws. As one by one they transform into deadites, she comes to discover the vows she took in life survive even in death. Okay, straight from the theater from Evil Dead Burn, and wow, what a brutal, relentless, unnerving, and gory fest this movie was. And I'll tell you what about the Evil Dead franchise. This franchise to me is kind of a mess. But is it a good mess? A bad mess? An extreme mess? Well, we're going to get into the good, the bad, and the ugly, and figure out where this one fits along in this quite odd franchise. The first thing I'm going to put in the positives for this one is I feel like this is kind of a legacy sequel in a way, somewhat. And we're going to get into why I'm putting this in the positives. And I feel like movies that are, coming out 20, 30, 40 years later after the original one's been released, they fall into this nostalgic tropes. And this one, I feel like did just enough nostalgia right, but doesn't lean on the nostalgia and creates some more lore, some more craziness, and a new and invented version of this story. I feel like within the Evil Dead franchise, this is the sixth installment, right? So like the first three were definitely all different from each other. Well, the first two are kind of the same, except for the second one leans into the comedy. And then the third one goes straight comedy. But each installment is quite different, and the main character, Ash, is different in all of them. Now, since it's been rebooted in 2013, it's been different. So Evil Dead 2013 doesn't really connect at all to Evil Dead Rise. And then I'm wondering, do any of these ones in the modern franchise in the Tale 3 connect to each other? I feel like other than the Deadites and, the Evil Dead and the book, they're not really linear stories. And there is expected to be another Evil Dead to come, which is supposed to be a prequel, which I would assume isn't going to be tightly connected to this group of characters. Now, it is hard to connect characters or keep the stories all connected when in most of these movies the entire cast pretty much dies, and at the end you're usually left with one or two, so it's not like Scream where they keep bringing back the same characters over and over and over again. And for as much as I would love to see Ash in one of these modern day sequels, and I'm not sure why he's not in them, if that's his choice or if they're just not going that route. They did find a way to tune into the previous Evil Dead franchises, and I probably think of there's an element of a chainsaw, some electric tools, power tools that are in this that kind of reference back to the original Evil Deads, especially Evil Dead 2, where Ash has a chainsaw arm. So there's little hints of that in this one, which was neat. So like I said, they're doing the nostalgia right by not making it every second, every joke, every line, but just little hints of things from the past, which you show up and you go, yeah, I remember that. Another thing I'll put in the positive is our final girl. She definitely puts on a performance, has some serious acting chops here. Her physicality, just of the amount of stuff that she has to go through. And I would say this will probably spread around to everyone in this cast. This was a very physical movie, and obviously with all of these Evil Dead movies, they've always kind of been that way. And this one is no different. Now, the next thing I'll put in the positives is Evil Dead has never been known for having too much of a plot, especially in the front end of the series. Evil Dead 2013 definitely had a plot, and Evil Dead Rise had somewhat of a plot. I feel like this one has the most plot that any of these movies have ever had. So that's an addition to this franchise, which is kind of neat, because this is kind of like a family.
We found you.
William, my sweet boy. I would give anything for us to be together again.
The whole family can be reunited.
We're going to get into a movie blend, but I will tell you that this definitely, part of this plot gives me the vibes of Ready or Not. Because our final girl in this movie marries into this family, and pretty much the entire family, her in-laws, become Deadites. And then for the majority of this movie, the Deadites, just like all the Evil Dead movies, are pretty much chasing her down in this farmhouse. And it was, at one point, it really started to give me a Ready or Not vibe. Even all the way up till the end. I'll have to elaborate on some of what I'm talking about in spoilers, because literally this movie has like a little Ready or Not ending. Just a little homage to Ready or Not. I don't know if that was on purpose. It feels like this movie and this franchise is a blend of multiple movies. And when I think of Evil Dead Burn, and I think of The Exorcist meets The Mummy meets The Night of the Living Dead, and I feel like all these franchises have had these elements. You know, I just, coming off the last quarter, watching Lee Cronin's The Mummy, comparing The Mummy to The Exorcist, and many people were comparing The Mummy to Evil Dead, and I couldn't really see it 100%, but now after seeing Evil Dead Burn and watching Evil Dead Rise, so I did watch a multiple of these movies. Getting ready for this one, I watched Evil Dead 2013 again, I watched Evil Dead Rise again, and I watched Army of Darkness for the first time. When it comes down to this franchise and their antagonists, their villains, their creature, their dead, they're Deadites, right? So what is a Deadite? So like a Deadite is basically kind of like a zombie, but much smarter, much more agile, and it's kind of possessed. Like you read from the book, and the demon or whatever it is that brings these evil dead back to life kind of possesses them, and that's where you kind of get the exorcism vibes. So it's like a really intense zombie that's dead, but also possessed and demonic. So like these Deadites they're just insane. And I feel like in this installment, more than many of the previous installments, these Deadites are intense. Very intense. And very grueling and very gruesome, gory. Also like what I said about Lee Cronin's The Mummy, my stomach turned. It was very gruesome. It was like gross in parts. Lots of close-ups on bloody teeth and bloody lips and drool and spit and mouths. And it's funny how the Mummy franchise is really now kind of very similar to the Evil Dead franchise, especially in all these latest installments.
This isn't the Book of Amun-Ra. This is something else. I think this may be the Book of the Dead.
The Book of the Dead? Are you sure you want to be playing around with this thing?
It's just a book. No harm ever came from reading a book.
That happens a lot around here. So what's it say?
Amun-Ra. Amun-Day. It speaks of the night and of the day. Sueyaharum hoktub sin mas ibet baya. Imatipin sumpike sitsue yatue yatue yatue.
From the book!
So I'll let that lead me right into the mix. So I'm mixed on the extremity of the gore and the blood. I mean, it's intense. It is probably, it definitely is more intense. And I thought Evil Dead Rise was pretty intense in the final act with the blood and the gore and the grossness. This one's definitely taking the cake. They're definitely doing the more gore, more kills, more carnage candy. This whole franchise has been doing that since it started. And this one is brutal. It is very bloody. I mean, extremely bloody. I'd say not even in the third act, but like the second act. And this also has a cold open, which gets pretty gruesome as well. And I really do like the open. There's this opening scene with other characters that are out on a lake. So this kind of takes us away from the apartment building where this franchise had left off and brings us to back into we're not in the deep woods, but we're definitely like in the outskirts. But when it comes down to the gore, is it gore for gore's sake? Is it extreme for extreme's sake? Is a lot of it just so extreme just for that shock value? And somewhat yes and somewhat no. And that's why I'm putting it in the mix, because it definitely pushed my envelope for how much gore and extremity I can take in a horror movie. And I love horror movies, and I love premises like this. And the idea of a deadite and this premise is awesome. But when you get such extremities, and it lingers on. I think that's where I get kind of like, I was closing my eyes, looking away, and it is kind of a compliment to like the sound design, the visuals, and cinematography wise, this was pretty decent. There was some pretty awesome shots and some pretty neat visuals here and there. Some of them which I feel like could be very iconic for this series. And that'll lead me to the second thing I'm mixed on, and that is this series over time has definitely put its foot in and out of comedy, and I wasn't a fan of the third one, Army of Darkness. It just was too silly. And then, sometimes in the second one was where the silliness was really introduced in this franchise. But here, there is like an element of comedy, which sometimes is like causing a tonal shift within the movie. There's one character, primarily like this older lady, who pretty much is the source of the majority of the comedy for this movie. And they kind of play off the fact that she's elderly, the fact that she has dementia, the fact that she is not with it. And some of her stuff is funny, but some of it I felt like was kind of cruel and just bizarre. And sometimes it just takes you out of what's going on with the intensity of this movie, because this movie is intense. And then I'll let this bring me to the negatives. So in the negatives, I definitely would say is, well, the first thing for me is the running time. It's almost 2 hours, and because it feels like the third act really starts almost halfway through in the second act, it seems like we're getting to the climax, we're at a climax, but then it's one of those endings where you have kind of what you thought was the climax, but then another climax. And that's going to connect to the other thing that I'm going to put in the negatives. I felt like this was a very great idea as far as the intensity, the Ready or Not with her having all her in-laws chasing her vibe. But it was the amount of characters and the amount of deadites and the amount of them that seemed like, who was the head deadite? Who was the biggest threat? And it seemed like for the majority of the film, it was supposed to be one character, but then it was kind of another character, but then that whack character was outside of the house for a good portion of the film. So then there's another character and another character. It's like, it seemed like it was just became overstuffed with deadites and characters that our final girl has to battle and overcome to get to the final climax. So let's make this all make a little bit more sense by getting into some spoilers. I am going to say overall, despite some of the mixed bag and the extremity of this movie, I am going to give it a positive review. So you can skip to the rating if you haven't seen it. So this movie opens up with like a kind of a cold open. You have these two guys that are out on a lake, and it seems very similar to the lake that they were near in Evil Dead 2013. And they're fishing, and the one guy's on his phone, and it's raining, and there is this deadite that appears, and I'm not sure if this deadite is connected to Evil Dead 2013. It doesn't seem like it's one of the Evil Deads from 2023, Evil Dead Rise, but this girl basically comes up from the lake and attacks, and it is a very brutal opening. There's two guys on the boat. First one gets pulled off and pulled under, and then the second guy even has a more brutal death, and it's like brutal with the water is like boiling and the fish are boiling up, and he's in the steaming hot water and he burns up. I mean, the movie's called Evil Dead Burn, and there's a lot of burning. It starts with burning in the water. And then we flash forward to our main characters. Now it starts off with our final girl who is at this like bar with her husband and her husband's brother, and I guess brother's girlfriend or brother's wife. Okay, these are, you know, now we're getting introduced to people who are part of the in-law crew, and husband is fighting. It's brother's birthday, and husband is fighting with brother about the presents, and then he's fighting with his girlfriend, and it's just, it gets a little drawn out, and then there's this whole element of he's not going to drink and drive and so forth, but he ends up driving, ends up getting away. He drives into the woods, and then we come across the same dead-eyed girl that killed the two from the opening, and he crashes into them. The car catches on fire, and she's part of it, and the title card comes up, Evil Dead Rise. It was very, I thought the title card in Evil Dead Rise was awesome, and the title card here, Evil Dead Burn, I just said Rise the first time, but Evil Dead Burn comes up, and it's very similar. I thought it was more impactful in Rise, but this was still a very impactful title card. Then we flash forward to the funeral, and the funeral is at this like crematorium. There's only like 5 or 6 people there, which I thought was odd. Like, it's pretty much final girl and all the in-laws. And in-laws consist of father, mother, old lady grandmother, who's the senile dementia one, and then we've got, you know, the brother, the wife, and then our final girl who was married to the guy that was killed in the burning car. And just to note that there's reference and discussions of grandfather who's already dead as well. And we have this thing going on where she doesn't want to talk, and it's like she's already kind of removed from the family. She doesn't even want to give a eulogy. She showed up in sweatpants and a shirt, and, you know, it's pretty obvious that they had problems before he was killed in the car accident.
Alice? What's wrong?
After the funeral's done, the body is being wheeled back to a crematorium, is about to be burned for good. But then father decides to go to the back. He wants to say one more goodbye. And there's this tap. There's a lot of knocking in this movie. But don't worry, it's not Tamara. Son wakes up in the coffin, and he rises up, and he is a deadite, you know, and he basically gets his dad, but not fully. So dad has a very slow transition. So like there's like, this is where there's kind of like, sometimes it takes a while for someone to become a complete deadite, and other times it's like they don't completely change ever. Other ones change really fast. They're never on the same page about that. So I guess, I don't know if that really matters, but it mattered to making this story work the way it did. Then we flash forward to them all being at home. So then we are at son's house, and he inherited the house from grandpa, and it's in kind of shabby conditions, and dad is making a big note of that. They're basically having this dinner, and they're trying to, it's like pretty much right after the funeral, and this is where we get some of the comedy from the old lady, and we realize that she's kind of losing it. She doesn't know who everyone is. She's funny, but she's also kind of gross. There's also to note that there's a dog, and so the dog does become a deadite as well, which I thought was pretty neat. Now, how do the deadites all start happening? So it's very apparent, we as the audience know that Dad had contact with the other deadite already. So like he's probably a deadite. He's kind of slow turning, and there's this thing where he's arguing and he's gonna leave. So they're finally going in the car, and you have father and his son and his wife. They're in this car leaving the property, and it's like Dad's already kind of turning, and somehow he crashes the car, and then he attacks son's wife, and she's next to turn. And this was the part that we see in the preview where she gets like the top of the car seat slammed through her mouth, and she enters the house that way. But son runs back to the house unharmed, or at least he's not a deadite yet, and he comes banging on the door, and we still have Mama, Grandma, and Final Girl in the house still. He comes in all panicked and out of breath, and that's where we get what was pretty much part of the main trailer, where the girl with the car seat through her face comes in and attacks. And for the rest of the movie, we're in this house where it pretty much is one by one, each one of these characters that is part of her in-law family is becoming a deadite. It takes a little bit of time. There's a lot of battling, so this is where I kind of thought it was strange too, because Dad shows up with the dog, who is now also a deadite, and Dad and dog are, for the big part of the second act, are on the outside. They don't come in right away. But the daughter, who's already a deadite, is in, and they throw her in the basement, but then she comes up, and there's this comical scene where it's kind of all getting nuts, and they put Grandma on the electric chair that goes up and down, which was kind of comical. And then sister is battling with, or it's not really sister, it's sister-in-law, or brother's wife, is battling, and she attacks him over this dishwasher, which was a very brutal scene. And I thought he was going to die from it. I don't know how he didn't die from landing on all these knives and forks and, what would be in a dishwasher. I mean, she literally lands on him on the dishwasher, and then the thing collapses again, and it's that he's got to be jammed up all over the place in his back. But then he gets up and walking around. He's not a deadite yet. It takes a while before he's a deadite. That's some of them, it takes a while. Grandmother, she becomes a deadite fast. So they brought grandmother up to her bedroom, and there was this really, really nasty scene where the one girl deadite takes grandmother's dentures out, licks them, sticks them in her mouth, swishes them around almost like mouthwash, and then reinserts them in Grandma. And that's all we know how Grandma becomes a deadite, because she's fine, and then when we revisit her later, she's a deadite. So there was this really haunting scene where Mom goes into the room and is kind of tucking Grandma in. This is kind of reminding me of the Voices of Our Mother, where you have grandmother and mother taking care of each other, but it was kind of reversed in this movie. But there was this really neat scene where grandmother's on the sheets, and as mother's walking away, she kind of rises up, kind of like Regan in The Exorcist, and then once the blanket comes down, it's very apparent that she's a deadite now too. And this pretty much takes us into the third act, where pretty much finally Dad gets in, and he kind of does this really bizarre scene where he's kissing Mom, and Mom makes this really funny joke where she's like, "Oh, you haven't kissed me like that in years." It was a very, very intimate kiss, but very gross, because he's been stabbed in the face, and he's got holes, he's all bloody, he's deadite. But she kissed him anyway. Anyhow. And then it was she was a deadite, she wasn't a deadite. I couldn't figure out, because I felt if Grandma could become a deadite just because dentures was in a deadite's mouth, then how come Mom didn't become a deadite after kissing Dad? But she does eventually become a deadite too. It's just everyone's turning rate was different, and there was no who, or why, how on that. Anyhow, the third act becomes a bloodbath, Pretty much everyone gets in. So kind of what disappointed me about this is, you know that the main deadite is husband. It takes him forever to get there. And he really is only in like the last 15 minutes after everyone else has kind of been taken care of. So the whole plot point is once these deadites are in and they're battling with everyone and turning each other over, they're looking for this dagger that Grandpa had. Grandpa was part of this series called The Wise Men. I'll have to put it across the screen because I forget it. It's like a Circle of Wise Men group that he'd been a part of. They basically had been tracking deadites and protecting people from deadites for years to come. That's why Grandpa was so removed from the family. Anyhow, there's this dagger, and Son apparently knew where the dagger was, and they all want the dagger. So the dagger's the key. So, and I think this is new to this franchise, having like a dagger kill deadites. Anyhow, the dagger does work. It takes our final girl a long while to find the dagger, but she does find it, and she starts killing them all off one by one. Now, sometimes I felt like, and this is where it's like they skipped a few of them, because like I don't think Grandmother gets a kill, but like she kills Dad. She kills Dad's other son, her brother-in-law. And then she gets out, and then this is where, like, you think it's the end, but then she kind of escapes to this other place. So finally we're away from the house, and she gets to this, like, I don't know, some sort of, it looks like a place like big trucks would work, like some sort of factory plant of some sort with tractors and tools and whatever. You have no idea what it is, but it's definitely a building, a maintenance building. So like she's battling now with her husband, and he straight up started to evolve to literally look like Imhotep from the Mummy. So like that's what I was saying, like the Mummy connections now to this movie. It's like it's kind of like the Evil Dead is like the central figure of all these like zombie demons, dead, you know. I mean, the title is Dead, you know. Night of the Living Dead was first, and then Evil Dead. You know, this dead, that dead, you know. Each dead has its own rule, I guess.
Every shelter is becoming a trap.
Are you sure we're gonna be all right?
Cooper, you gotta help me out!
And every road out
Don't stop no matter what happens.
is just another dead end.
They're coming right for us!
Of course, it ends with her. It's a long battle, and this is where you start to feel the length. But Evil Dead Burn, it ends with a burning. And it's a pretty decent burning. Like, burning better than Michael Myers' house at the end of Halloween 2018, the beginning of Halloween Kills. You know, it was very reminiscent of the whole house burning with him in it. And it was pretty neat. And then we get the fire police and showing up, and this is where we get that final little Ready or Not vibe, where one of the EMTs comes up and is like, "Who did this to you?" And she just says, "My husband." So and then lights a cigarette. So, you know, it's very similar the way it kind of played out at the end of Ready or Not. I said the same thing. There was a similar ending in They Will Kill You, where like she says in-laws and.
You hear me? I've got someone on the south lawn. We need paramedics over here right away.
Copy that.
Jesus Christ. What happened to you?
In-laws.
You know, it's just like, these movies are funny. They kind of pull from each other. But this one overall was executed well enough. Despite the extremity and some of the little plot holes here and there, the intensity, the scariness, you know, it kept me captivated. So we're going to get down to business on this one. Because overall, I feel like this one's pretty intense. Might be a mixed bag for some people. I mean, it does push that envelope to almost Terrifier level with gore. Like, it definitely outdoes, like, Abigail and Ready or Not, for sure. I mean, it's a bloodbath. A bloodbath. So, with that all being said, we're going to go ahead and get Evil Dead Burn, a good burger, but a good burger with ketchup. In fact, extra ketchup. So please, like, subscribe, tap that notification bell, all that jazz if you want more horror movie reviews. And don't forget to stay scared of those evil deadites that possess your in-laws and try to kill you.